In this video, we'll show you how to install 2 springs on an easy set system where you're reusing the cable drums, cables, and the end brackets. When you took your system down, there's no reason to remove the end bracket or the winder on each end. So we're going to start the video with the winders and end brackets already in place. When you removed your old system, you removed the plastic support bracket. We'll be replacing that with the standard center support bracket, also called the spring anchor bracket. It's going to be centered above the door. When installing the torsion assembly, you want the shaft to be perfectly straight across the top of the door, parallel to the top of the door. So the center of this bracket needs to be lined up with the center of the bearing on the end. In order to get this measurement, we use a tape measure, measure from the top of the door and use a level eyeball it in the middle. Looks like we're right at 12 inches. Installers normally offset the bracket about a foot or so from the center. The reason we do this is a lot of times there's limited space and you can get an operator here, but you can't get it here because there's not enough room above the bracket. So you can still run an operator here and the door not hit it when the door is opening. So in order to determine where to put that so it lines up with the end bearing, we notice that the measurement was 12 inches from the top of the door. So we go here, offset, and mark 12 inches. Notice that there's already a mark from it. Looks like another measurement. But that is 12 inches. On the bracket, if you can see this notch lines up with the center of the hole where the bearing's going to be. So that notch is the center point of the bracket, and you want this notch to line up. Notice that the mark that we made is centered with the notch in the bracket. Also, the bracket is narrower here and further out up here. That allows the door to come up and gives it more room so it doesn't hit the bracket. So at this point, we'll line the bracket up with the mark and pre-drill the top hole. Okay, so that's in place. This is lined up. I want to level that. Okay. So now that the bracket is plumb, we pre-drill the other 2 holes. Use a 3/16 bit to drill. Now, because we're near the top of the beam, I put the holes side by side. That should be okay. I drilled down a little bit to keep the wood from spreading. If I had gone up here to drill the second hole, the wood might have split and we would have lost some of the anchoring. Drill Secure the section back screw. Okay, so the bracket's in place. The shaft will be lined up with the end bearings, and the shaft will be parallel to the top of the door. Also, the bracket is plumb. I've been on doors where the bracket was pitched, tilted, and the bearing actually wore through and cut the shaft. So you want this thing plumb, you want everything level. So at this point, we will install the shaft and put it into place. So the next step is we put a vice grip on here so the shaft doesn't come out when we're installing the springs. Put this vice grip here. You want the vice grip in here. If you put it out here, the shaft can still come out. But if you put it further in, shaft can't come out. So at this point, we'll set the springs up to install them. Notice that the cone on one spring is red and the other one's black. The black one goes on the right side. It's a left wind spring. The spring with the red cone goes on the left side. It's a right wind spring. So for simplicity, always position this in place, position this one in place. So that when I'm installing the spring, I can just reach down, pick it up, and slide it on the shaft. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to slide on the bearing, the spring, and then slide on the cable drum. Now, on a standard torsion spring system with just a single bracket, it only gets one bearing. A lot of people see the place in the cone for a second bearing, but if they try to install two bearings on the center support bracket, a lot of times it'll break one of the cones. So you don't want to do that. So we slide the shaft over, slide on the bearing. Now the bearing is going to fit in the cone. So you want this bearing to go on this way. Next goes on the spring. You may have to loosen the set screws. Slide the shaft partway through. So you slide the shaft through the bearing just until you can see the end of the shaft. Then you put your cable drum up here. Now the cable is going to be going off the back side of the drum. So you want to make sure that you have the correct cable drum over here. So we put this in here and then slide the shaft through the cable drum. And that won't come off. Notice that there's red paint on the cable drum. So the red is for the left side. Also, you notice that the red paint here matches the red paint here. Now, in the Easy Set system, you didn't have that color coordination. When we were installing the parts on the other side, the winder came out on this side. So we can pull that off, or if your winder is still, if your winder is still in place, you can just slide the shaft over. An easy way to tell which way the winder goes is to check where your 7/16 winding screw is. So now, slide the other spring on. You may need to loosen the set screws. Notice, oops, there's no bearing on this side because you only need one bearing in the middle. Slide that over. Now at this point, we're going to put the cable drum on. Notice that it has black paint for the right side. Now, in order to get it on the other side of the bracket, we slide the shaft through the winder. Until it just barely see the end of the shaft on the other side of the bearing. Now the cable drum can either go this way or that way, but in order for it to work properly, you have to have the cable come out on the right side of the drum. So you just put that there, the cable's going to come out of the drum and go down on the back side of the drum. So we slide the shaft through, and we use as a guide 3 fingers. Now if you have a smaller hand, you may want to use 3.5 fingers. If you've got 3 fingers, it's usually about 3 or 4 inches on each side. So we also want to install the tube retainer. Sometimes when a spring breaks, the shaft will jump out and have problems. So we put the tube retainer on here. You don't want to tighten this too tight. It'll split the plastic. So the next point, notice that there's some play in here. So at this point, I'm going to tighten the set screws. Start with one set screw. And then we rotate it. Then we rotate the drum 180 degrees and tighten the other set screw. Next, I install the cable. And rotate the drum, making sure that the cable stays on the outside groove of the drum. Also, Notice that this slides back and forth. You want the cable drum all the way against the race of the bearing. So in order to keep the cable on the drum and in place, I'll pull on the shaft, torquing it, and while I'm torquing it, I put the vice grip over here. So now the cable is tight. It's also on the outside groove of the drum. So now I'll go over to the other side. On this side, I tighten the cable drum and then install the cable. On the other side, I'll install the cable on the drum and then tighten the set screws. Okay, so on this side, we install the cable first. Make sure it's on the outer groove, outside groove of the drum. Make sure there's nothing sticking out here. And then pull the cable drum, make sure the cable's tight on the outside groove of the drum. Now you'll notice that the cable drum at this point can slide back and forth. Also the shaft can slide back and forth. So what you want to do is pull the shaft to the left and then push the cable drum to the right. So that when we tighten it, the shaft cannot slide either direction. So now I'm pulling the shaft, make sure it's tight. I'm pushing the cable drum against the bearing. So at this point, I'll tighten the set screws. Notice that the cable on this side is tight now. So tighten the set screw, usually a quarter to half a turn after it hits the shaft. And there's another set screw down here. Start it with the long end. And then pull it. Now both cable drums are tight. The shaft will not slide either way. Cable drums are tight, everything's tight. Slide the spring over. The next step is to go to the middle and assemble the hardware there. At this point, I'm going to install the stationary cone and the spring anchor bracket. So start from this side with the bearing in it. Notice that this doesn't line up down here. In order to get this to line up, I have to lift up on the shaft. Notice that the race of the bearing is to the left of the bracket. It needs to be above it, or lined up above it, and not on the other side. Now when we put this together, we've got to be careful to lift the shaft enough so that the race of the bearing is on the is above the bracket and not on the left side of it. But before we do that, it's always good to spray a little lube in here so that over the years or decades, the shaft and bearings will stay loose and the shaft will be in good shape. So the next step is to install the other spring. And then we finger tighten the nuts. Now if we finger tighten the nuts, we lift up. Notice how we lift up. These two sides can come together. But if we don't lift up, they don't. Now this can have a problem here with that race of the bearing being on the bracket. So we lift up a little bit to keep that up. And then while holding it up, tighten the top nut. And then notice that at this point, both sides of the stationary cones are flush with the bracket. So then we tighten this. That. And we're all set here in the middle. For safety, we're going to add another vice grip. I usually install it about 3 inches above the roller on one side. And so when we wind the springs, you don't want the door to come up and knock you off the ladder. We also have a second vice grip up here that will swing around if the springs are too strong and stop the door at about 6 or 8 inches. At this point, I'll be winding the spring. And one thing that's important is you want your ladder set just to the inside of the winding cone, so that when you're winding, you can stay out of the path of the cone in case something should happen. For example, if you don't insert your bar all the way and the cone breaks, it could fly out and do some damage. Okay, so on this easy set system, the springs normally have 10.5 to 11 turns. So we're going to start with 10.5, see how the door works, and then adjust accordingly. So each spring will get 10.5 turns. Now 10.5 turns translates to 42 quarter turns. So you count 42 quarter turns on the bars. So we start here. This is 1. Notice also that we've taped the bars for safety. When you have tape on a bar, you can hear it go in. Also, you can see that the bar is in all the way. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, if you have plenty of room above your door, you can go 2 at a time. So we're at 8 right now. So then you can go 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. That's getting a little hard, so I'm just going to go 1 quarter at a time, 1 quarter turn at a time. So we're at 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 6, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. So at this point, I'll stretch the spring. We usually stretch the spring the distance of the thickness of one coil. So just make a mark out here, just beyond the red cone. That's about the thickness of a coil. Now I'm going to pull the bar at a 45-degree angle. If I just tap this and knock it over, it comes back. So if I pull back and then pull it toward me, I can tap it and the cone will slide and stay. So then, while holding the winding bar, pulling it at a 45-degree angle, I can tighten these set screws. Now you never pull the bar out until you've got both set screws tightened. And I usually go half to 3/4 of a turn after the set screw hits the shaft. Okay. So this spring is wound. Now the way to test this is to pull down on it, make sure it doesn't come loose. Now the set screws will secure to the shaft tightly enough to where if you only have one set screw, it'll hold. But you never want to test it. You always tighten both set screws. So if we test this at this point and lift up on it, we can actually pull the door up a little bit. And that's telling us that both set screws are tight enough to hold not only the tension on this spring, but also to hold the weight of the door as I pull up. Okay.
Rolling.
So now I'll wind the spring on the right. I position my ladder so that I'm inside the cone. Now, another thing that's helpful too is you want to make sure as you wind the spring that the spring grows in length. When you wind a spring, the inside diameter decreases a little bit as the spring grows in length. But you'll see that as we wind the spring, it'll cover the mark. We get a lot of phone calls from people who installed the springs on the wrong side of the bracket. And as they wind the spring shrinks. For example, if you were to go down, you see you have more space there than you do when it's up here. So if you wind it the wrong way, you get up to about 6 turns and then the cones slip out because the inside diameter of the spring is larger than the cone. So at this point, we're going to wind the spring just as on the other side. 10.5 turns will be 42 quarter turns. And because we have room above, we'll go 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. Springs get a little harder to wind, so I'm going to go quarter turn now each time. So we're at 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 40, 41, 42. Now, before I tighten the set screws, before I mark and tighten the set screws, I want to demonstrate something. A lot of times people want to know how hard is it to wind a spring. So I have a fish scale. You can get these on Amazon for 10 or 12 bucks. So I turn it on, and it's set at 0 pounds. So then I can put this on here. And pull on it. Can you see that?
No.
Let me turn it towards you. See that?
Probably need a close-up if I'm going to read the number.
Okay. Looks like 6.325 pounds. Can you get a close-up?
Angle it down a little bit. Okay.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
What's the weight on it? Got moved a little bit.
6.325. I think it might have set.
Oh, it's still 6. Okay.
Yeah.
See, if you move this any at all, it changes.
Right.
So you got that?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So 6 pounds is nothing, but you do it 42 times, and it's like working out with a 6-pound weight. How many times can you go before you get tired? So that's why you may feel a little tired when you put on 42 quarter turns. So, as we did on the other side, we'll mark this about a coil over. And I go ahead and finger tighten the set screws. Go back a quarter turn. And then pull the bar 45 degrees toward me and toward the inside. And then tap this over. And then tighten the set screws. Half to 3/4 turns on each set screw. So before I remove the bar, I test it and jerk it to make sure nothing comes loose. So now I do my initial test of the balance of the door. So notice that the door stays down. If I lift it up a little bit, it stays there. So that's a good sign that we have the correct spring, also the correct amount of tension. Notice down here for safety, as I lift the door, the roller down here hits the vice grip. Notice also the vice grip on the shaft. As I raise the door, it starts to swing around. That's in case the springs are too strong or you overwound them. You have the two vice grips there for safety. So now what I'll do is go down and test the complete balance of the door to see how it opens and closes and make sure it stays open halfway and on the floor as it does now. So now I'll remove the vice grip from the track. And you can also see how the vice grip is an extra safety. So as I open the door, if you have too much tension on the spring, you come up, the vice grip will catch the top of the door. Now I'll remove the vice grip. And the door is not going to come up and knock me off the ladder because we've already tested it. So the next step is to check the balance of the door. Open it, stays halfway. Go all the way up. It stays open. So you can actually operate it with your little finger. It just kind of tight. Finger here. You can see the little finger. I'm Dan Music. Thank you for watching.